Take a journey with me into the librarium as we check out this new game that I was invited to play called Libritopia. It's a library simulator that seems like a really fun casual play. And while we do that, I want to talk about some of the books that inspire me and why they've shaped me as a writer and a YouTuber and brought me into Warhammer 40k and all of that fun stuff. So let's dive into it and get to the gameplay and a good conversation. What I wanted to talk about today isn't my books personally. It's the books that led me to where I am now. I'm sure anyone and everyone has some book somewhere that inspired you to do something. For me, there's a lot of them. So we're going to talk about some of the big landmark ones. I have most of them here. One of them I don't, so I'll put a picture up right here in post, and we'll go from there. So for me, the first book that ever really inspired me to read and to write is actually the Harry Potter series, as I'm sure most people my age would tend to agree on. That's the one I don't have here. They're somewhere at my parents' house. I probably need to go hunt those down when I have some free time. So obviously you'll see the first book here as I talk about it. It was the first book. It wasn't the first book I ever read. It was the first book that really stuck with me. It inspired me to write some stories, mostly short stories, as well as create a bunch of internal and external narrative with my friends that we used to imagine we were there too, as I'm sure the vast majority of people did. And it really gave me the ability to understand storytelling. The second book I discovered just a couple years later, second series I should say, I discovered a couple years later, and that's Lord of the Rings. Obviously this isn't the original copy I've ever had. I got a leather-bound edition just a few years ago. That is extremely special to me. I've already read it a few times in this copy, but it is the framework for what fantasy should be, period. Tolkien is known as the father of modern fantasy. I completely agree. Everything he does has been a heavy influence on me as a writer, through descriptions, dialogue, imagining fantastical beasts, the idea of world building all came from him. He's one of the first to actually do that. My love of science fiction came just 2 years after I read that, when an English teacher actually talked me into reading Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. This book, another leather-bound classic here. You'll notice I also tend to collect the books that had influences on me. But this series opened the door to me to a whole other genre. I had enjoyed a lot of fantasy and things like that beforehand, but when I discovered science fiction, I discovered a whole new look on life that I have never backed down from since. I've dived deep into Star Wars, Star Trek, and many, many others because of this book. So it's probably one of the most pivotal books in my lifetime. Another, say, series of stories are Arthurian tales. These are ones that, growing up, my parents used to share with me a lot, and I took a love of even further. I have loved reading anything and everything about Arthur, Merlin, the Knights of the Round Table, and any other stories that come from that time frame. It's something that has inspired a lot of my writing. If you've read the Forgotten Allegiance and the Risk of Conviction series, you'll see a lot of Arthurian influences there. I don't stick to medieval England with those characters. A lot of those influences come from my family history. So Mongols, Vikings, a lot of Middle Eastern cultures, Greece, Rome, as well as several Asian cultures as well, that all make up me, and I wanted to represent them in a story. So a lot of those books are loosely inspired by this, plus my family history. So they have been a massive, massive push in my storytelling. Some of the first stories I ever wrote were attempts at versions of an Arthurian tale that will never see the light of day because they are not good. Although sometime eventually in my writer journey, I do actually plan on creating my own version of an Arthurian tale because it's kind of a bucket list thing for me, along with a few other things that I will probably talk about here a little bit later. When I got into high school, I got into spy novels, especially Bond and Bourne. Those two consumed a lot of my reading time after Harry Potter finished and after I had finished with most of what was available in fantasy and science fiction at my school's libraries. I found these and I fell in love with them. It also helped that my dad is a major Bond fan, so it was a pretty easy transition for me. If you haven't read them, please do. I also pull a lot of influence into spycraft, things like that, in my stories because of these guys. In high school, I had a couple very, very good English teachers that made reading classic literature not homework, but fun. And that's how I found the next book that has become kind of an obsession for me. It's The Count of Monte Cristo. This is one of the stories that I have read dozens of times. I've seen every iteration of, and I would highly recommend. Yes, it is massive, but it is so good. You'll see a lot of this having influence in my stories as well. Not so much in the ones that have been released. I have one coming up where The Count of Monte Cristo was actually a very big inspiration for it. And I gave it a pretty big sci-fi twist that honestly I think is one of the best books I've ever written. So I can't wait to share that with you guys. I'm hoping in the next couple of years. We'll see. I'm currently querying agents and publishers on that. So it may be a little bit longer road. After I went down my literary fiction route, I spent a long time on historical fiction. Everything from medieval England to World War II. This is one of my personal favorites. As you can see, it's pretty tattered. This has been with me since my junior year in high school. And has been a book that I've read at least a dozen times. A lot of these stories are very important to me and have inspired a lot of what I've done in my writing as well. There's a lot of historical events that, with a little tweak, can be translated very easily to fantasy or science fiction, and I've thoroughly enjoyed doing that. So historical fiction is one of the ones that has heavily inspired me as well. Okay, so now I want to talk about my three current obsessions, for lack of a better word. The three major stories or genres, per se, that I really love. Two of them, it's because of the author specifically. And the third is kind of turned into a small obsession with me, be as a science fiction author and as someone who loves a good story. So the first shouldn't shock anybody as a fantasy reader. Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere, as well as pretty much anything he writes, are books that I will read actively. I've loved so far reading everything from the year Sanderson. Personally, the first two books, Trust the Emerald Sea and The Frugal Wizard's Guide, were some of my absolute favorite books that he's written. I know that second one gets a very mixed opinion depending on whether you like that kind of stuff or not. I love that genre of science fiction, so I was super excited to see him write it. If you have not read any of Brandon Sanderson's works, please do, especially if you're a big fan of fantasy. He is incredible at world building, as well as everything he does with characters and things like that. I've had the pleasure of meeting him a couple times, as well as going to conferences to learn from him, as well as many of the other authors that he's friends with. And I'll be back there again shortly after Night of Epidaurus releases. So he's been a big influence on me lately, mostly in the world building sense. He and I don't share a lot of writing styles or narrative styles, which is fine. There's hundreds of different writing and narrative styles. But his world building and magic systems actually helped inspire the Roots of Conviction series heavily. The next is an author I currently love and will read anything of. That's Craig Allenson. He is an amazing indie published author that writes incredible books. Once again, I write nothing like him. He writes heavily into humor and satire and sarcasm, which is amazing. I wish I could, but just not the way I write, and that's fine. But I love reading him. And the fact that he's paired in the audiobooks with R.C. Bray creates some of the best audiobooks I have ever listened to. If you haven't read Expeditionary Force or his new Convergence series, please do. Convergence is a series that I've actually just got caught up on today. It's an urban fantasy series. This, obviously, science fiction. But please check out Craig Allenson if you haven't. He's an amazing author, and I can't wait to see more from him. The final series I want to talk about is far more than a series. It's an expansive universe that's existed for quite a while and is honestly one of my biggest obsessions. It is the Warhammer 40k universe. The book that got me in there is this one. The Gaunt's Ghost series by Dan Abnett is amazing. As I said earlier, World War II and historical fiction are a big thing for me. This is basically that, but in space. It's quite regularly jokingly referred to as Band of Brothers in Space. That is a very good description. So if you've ever seen the HBO show Band of Brothers, you'll love this. It's about a group of soldiers commanded by Gaunt who have to fight for their lives. They're sent into hundreds of different situations with hundreds of different foes and have to work their way out to try and save their lives, despite the fact that everybody either doesn't know who they are or doesn't like them. They're so good stories. And as far as authors that have a very similar writing style to, Dan Abnett is probably the closest you're going to get. He's influenced my writing style drastically. He specializes in writing grimdark without being grimdark. Basically, he's extremely talented at making sure there's still just enough hope to keep you reading, but keeping it grim and dark enough that there's always a threat, and you're always worried what's going to happen next. And I love his books. So far in the Black Library, which is the collection of Warhammer 40k books, there are hundreds of books, and he has written a large portion of them. And personally, one of my long-term goals, just like writing an Arthurian tale, is writing for the Black Library as well. I would love to be involved directly with Warhammer 40k. It's one of the few IPs that I would actually be willing to touch. Yeah. I know I've missed a lot of very famous books that I have read and I do love, but these are the ones that have had a major influence on me and how I write and what it actually did for me. So I'm sure I'll talk about more books later. And if there's any genres specifically you want me to talk about, or any series you want me to go in depth on, or anything you want to talk about in general, please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear from you guys, and I can't wait to make this channel something that everybody can enjoy. It may just maybe me rambling about books. Maybe I'll go down a rabbit hole about Warhammer. I could do that for sure, but I want to share my passions and my love with you guys beyond just what I write. And that's kind of been the whole goal of getting this YouTube channel up and running. So I hope you've enjoyed and hope you've listened to everything. Can't wait to hear from you, and until next week.